Okay, looks good. We're live on YouTube. I'll go ahead and record this. And we are good to go.
All right, well, welcome everyone. Appreciate you being here today. The second Paradise Sewer Regionalization Project Advisory Committee, or SERPAC, committee meeting. Just to remind everyone, the purpose of today's meeting, the town of Paradise has identified a connection to the CEQA water pollution control plant as a preferred alternative for wastewater treatment and disposal, and has approached the city of CEQA to explore the feasibility of such a regional project. The councils of the town of Paradise and the city of CEQA have agreed to form the SERPAC as a mechanism for exploring this regionalization proposal. The purpose of the committee is pretty specific. It's to, one, monitor progress of the Paradise Sewer Project, including the project's EIR and efforts being done under the town and city's cooperative funding agreement. Two, to develop the principles of agreement for an municipal agreement between the town and city, and to make a recommendation on those principles to the town and city councils if appropriate. And then third is to guide public participation through the EIR process, which will happen separately but in parallel to the committee's work. Committee members represent the signatory agencies to that cooperative funding agreement, and they're here with us today. From the town of Paradise, Mayor Steve Crowder and Vice Mayor Jody Jones, and the city of CEQA, Mayor Andrew Coolidge and Vice Mayor Casey Reynolds. Thanks for being with us today.
Absolutely.
The meeting agendas for those who are listening on the YouTube can be found at ceco.ca.us and also on the Town of Paradise website at townofparadise.com. There are multiple ways to participate in this venue. The first is just to view the meeting online, not necessarily interacting, and you can do that through the YouTube live feed, also included as part of the meeting notice and agenda. Another way is to provide public comment during the meeting, and to do that, you need to log on to the Zoom link that's included as the meeting notice and agenda. And then, of course, the third way is just to provide written comment before the meeting to the sewer committee at townofparadise.com. For this meeting, we received 3 emails which have been provided to the committee members prior to this meeting. One from Sawyer Stevens of Rochester, Indiana, another from Jeffrey Obser of CEQA, and William Kellogg of Paradise, just so that you know your emails have been received and forwarded to the committee members. So with that, we'll move to introductions, if that works for everyone. First, I just want to introduce the Central Valley Water Board's team. With me today, well, I guess I should start. I'm Clint Snyder, one of the Assistant Executive Officers of the Central Valley Water Board, and I manage Board's Reading Office. I have Brian Smith, a Supervising Engineer, with me, along with Eric Rapport and Jeremy Pagan, both Senior Engineers, and Gene Coughlin. Gene Coughlin is our IT Administrator, keeps us all on track as we navigate the technology we're using today. If you do have questions, easiest thing to do is raise your hand as we move through here. Meeting participants should have an opportunity to mute and unmute themselves, but as a safeguard, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll make sure that we pause to allow you time to speak. With that, I wanted to introduce Town Mayor Steve Crowder and Vice Mayor Jody Jones and Town Manager Kevin Phillips, if you wouldn't mind introducing the staff with you today.
Sure, thanks, Clint. So my name is Kevin Phillips, Town Manager. Steve Crowder, our Mayor, and Jody Jones, our Vice Mayor, is in here with me too. And also on the call from the town is Mark Maddox, our Public Works Director, and Katie Simmons, our Disaster Recovery Director.
Thanks, Kevin. And from the city of CEQA, Mayor Andrew Coolidge, Vice Mayor Casey Reynolds, and City Manager Mark Orm, who would also introduce his staff.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. We have the honor of having our Public Works Director over Operations, Eric Gustafson, here today. He's covering for Director Ottoboni as well. And we also have our fantastic City Clerk, Miss Debbie Presson, on the call as well.
and a couple of other guests with us today. HDR Engineering. We have Mr. John Butts and Ms. Leslie Tice, who will be speaking today and providing some of the presentation to the committee members. Are there any other staff, management, or council members from the town or city that we may have omitted?
There's one, sorry. We have our deputy clerk, Melanie Norris, on the call also. Thank you.
Thanks, Melanie. Okay, with that, first order of business is to review and if you so choose, approve the April 12 minutes. Draft minutes were included as part of the appointment to committee members. If you've had a chance to look at those, or if you need a couple of minutes to review them.
Clint, do you need a motion to approve?
I don't think we need a motion, just
Okay.
we can get
They look good to me.
a yay or nay from all four, that would be great.
Yeah.
Andrew?
Yep.
They look fine to me as well.
Thank you.
I agree. Look good to me too.
Look good to me.
Thanks, Casey. Minutes are approved. Move to committee member communication. We'll start with Mayor Crowder.
Do you have something to say?
Well, I'm just looking forward to getting this process going, and I think everybody knows how bad we need a sewer system, and just looking at getting this done, and again, grateful for the help that we're getting from everybody, and we're ready to go.
Thank you. Ms. Jones? Vice
I don't
Mayor?
have anything today.
Thank you. Mayor Coolidge?
Nothing for me. Thank you, though.
Okay. Vice Mayor Reynolds?
I don't have anything other than maybe asked about having potentially a county supervisor on. So maybe we can address that at some point.
Yes. Ms. Lucero?
No. And if Deborah's on, then I guess that
I'm
covers it. I
sorry.
didn't see her name on there. So.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm sorry. I didn't know if you kind of cut out there for
Okay.
a moment. Hi, Casey.
Sorry about that. Yeah,
Oh,
on
that's
there, so
okay.
I will, then he can see that that's supervisor on there. Thank you.
And thank you. We'll move to status updates. We've got a few items to work through. First is an update on the environmental impact report. Ms. Leslie Tice from HDR Engineering. That'll be followed discussion of cooperative funding agreement, scope of work, Eric Gustafson, and then principles of agreement working session, which is really the meat of this meeting, which will be led by Mr. John Butts of HDR Engineering. Are you ready, Leslie?
Sure. Let me go ahead and get this shared, and y'all can let me know if this is coming up as the projectors. Yeah, does that look all right?
Yes, it does.
All right, great. Thank you for that. So first, let me introduce myself. My name is Leslie Tice. I'm with HDR Engineering, and we've been working on this for a little over a year at this point. We're going through some alternative screening and just some initial constraints review from an environmental side so that we could set the project up on proper footing. So we've been here for a bit, and we're pretty excited to get to the scoping phase for this one. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But I have been supported by a team of technical specialists to cover the range of needs for the project. And you'll get to know how that's going throughout this process. So first, I think we spoke about this a little bit last month, but just to give you at least a screenshot of this, I want to introduce you to the new project website. If you go to that, you'll see on the bottom of the screen the link for that paradisesewer.com. It's a really nice new site, and it'll keep you up to date throughout the process. I want to specifically call out, here's the project overview page, and this is speaking to public engagement. This includes both the CEQA process, but also other types of engagement as well. And then as we go through the environmental process, right here in the middle, I think you can see the cursor, but otherwise it says environmental. That's where you'll see all the updates throughout the CEQA process, any of our studies, et cetera. So just bookmark that one. We're pretty proud about the page. And if you have input, that'd be great too, because ultimately we want this to be the most useful tool for our public, for decision makers, and for the SERPAC coming through here. All right, so where are we? Right now, we have issued the notice of preparation, and we're kicking off the scoping process as of May 3rd. That starts a 30-day public scoping process. The town of Paradise is the CEQA lead agency leading this, as we've discussed. And then they issued through the Office of Planning and Research this notice of preparation, which is more or less the public initiation to the CEQA process. We'll start that communications there. The town also sent copies of the notice of preparation to local elected officials, and the Office of Planning and Research sends it around to agencies that might have an interest in the project. We've also put out letters to tribes that might have an interest to conform with the Assembly Bill 52, the tribal notification requirements that align with this. So far, those just went out, so we haven't heard back, but we anticipate if there's any interest there that we'll get those next 30 days or so. Ultimately, the intention of the scoping period is to notify stakeholders that EIR is being prepared and to inform the public about the scope of the project. But more directly, within 30 days of the issuance of this notice of preparation, responsible lead agencies and the Office of Planning and Research are intended to provide the lead agency, the town in this case, with specific details about the scope and the content of the environmental review that they need to issue their own discretionary approvals or agreements with the project. So that's what we're trying to collect at this point. Otherwise, two other responsible agencies we're aware of at this time are the City of Chico, who's responsible for the decision as to whether to allow the proposed sewer line to connect to the city's water pollution control plant, and then the Butte LAFCO, which is responsible for approving the amendment to the current Chico jurisdictional boundaries. But we will be open to talking about other responsible agencies, trustee agencies, and the like throughout this process as well. And as I mentioned before, tribal notifications have gone out, so that would fall within that grouping as well. So during the 30-day scoping period, we are scheduling 2 public scoping meetings. One will be on Thursday, May 13th at 6 p.m. and the second on Tuesday, May 25th at noon. We're intending to make these as accessible as possible, and just given these will both be virtual meetings, given the nature of meetings these days, we want to separate that a bit. So if somebody was at the first meeting, you could attend the second and feel more comfortable commenting or whatever works for everybody. So that's the intention. I hope that folks here will make a attempt to join any of those. Otherwise, we will have a presentation to introduce the project and kind of talk through the process, and that will be recorded and kept on the project website. Some of the things that we'll be looking for feedback on from the public, environmental issues that should be studied, the nature and extent of potential environmental impacts, methods of analysis, measures that could reduce environmental impacts to mitigate those, alternatives that could avoid or reduce impacts. These are the types of things that really directly inform the environmental impact report and the technical analysis that goes with it. And those that are directly affected by it have a lot of the best input. Those are the folks on the ground who know the communities, know what works and doesn't work in the area. So the public scoping period will continue through June 3rd. And ultimately, here's the overall, today's schedule for the overall project. You see where we are now. Studies are ongoing through this, and they'll continue through the end of the year. We heard, I think it was last month, there was a comment from somebody asking that we avoid the holiday season, which is inevitably when all public meetings occur, to shift that so that you could have the most access and ability to be an effective member of those meetings. So we have shifted that. So that will occur in the first quarter of 2022. And otherwise, we're looking to finalize the EIR process next summer of 2022. And I think that brings us up to date. Unless there's any questions.
Leslie, this is John. Maybe you want to just touch a little bit on the field studies that have been going on.
Sure. So currently we have been, last year we were doing more of a desktop review of what types of technical issues might arise during the course of the environmental review, and we've set up our approach based on that. This year we've been kind of ground truthing a lot of that. So we've done a historic record search with the Northwest Information Center to identify where previous studies have identified cultural and archaeological resources, and then where there have not been studies. So right now we have our field teams out in the field kind of filling in those gaps where we didn't have previously recorded data. And then on a biological side, we did a desktop analysis of what types of species and habitat and concerns, wetlands, et cetera, are in the area. And then we've had teams out there ground truthing that as well to make sure that, you know, there's always tree covers and such so that we can get down there and see what's actually there, adjust our alignment to avoid any key impacts, identify where vernal pools are, and where to inform where design should go. Also, there's a few species out there that we're doing some observational surveys to see where those are and where we can plan best around them. So those are wrapping up, and those will all be directly input into the draft EIR.
Thank you, Leslie. Any questions by any of the committee members?
No questions here.
Thanks.
Can members of the public ask questions? This is Supervisor Lucero.
That's up to the committee members. You want to take a few questions now?
We have a hand raised
as well.
Sure.
I'm sorry, we have a hand raised, it looks like.
Yeah, look. Go with Mr. Lucas first and then Ms. Lucero. Go ahead, Steve Lucas.
Yes, thank you. Just a quick comment on your flow chart, your time frame that you just had up on your screen. Just a observation, you may want to put the LAFCO step in there. It might have seemed to people looking at that the final step of the process ends with construction, but there's nothing to indicate that there's another public step for the LAFCO process. If that wasn't intended, that's fine. I just wanted to make the observation.
Steve, I appreciate that. I think that's a great observation where during the scoping, we're really hoping to clarify what are those discretionary approvals that are needed, and specifically what is the specific question that's being approved to. I think that's a wonderful thing to add. We'll add that.
Thank you.
For the range fund.
Ms. Lucero.
Yes, I just wondered, I know that this is just 1 month, and I'm wondering if it's sufficient for all the agencies that are involved. I know for the county, I've been asking what does this entail? And, you know, actually we had a meeting about it a couple of weeks ago, and they said, well, until the scoping meeting, we're not really going to know what that's going to entail. So I haven't had an opportunity to talk to planning services, public works, environmental health, public health. I mean, there are several different departments that would need to weigh in on this. And I'm just concerned about the timeline of 1 month.
So from a CEQA standpoint, I'll speak to that. That's a prescribed timeframe that the policy asks for, that is intended to basically inform that process. Ultimately, it's just an introduction, and then it's to set the course for what kind of engagement happens with the draft EIR, which is a 45-day review period, being a really key part. We want to make sure that every one of those that you mentioned that should be part of the process is aware of that. That's not to say that this is the only means of that the town is engaging, however, and receiving input during the course. That is the main part, that the main mechanism, I'll say, for receiving comments specific to the EIR, however. So it's good to be aware. On the project website, and actually I have that, let me go back to that slide since it's this public engagement is where you'll see both means of outreach and engagement for both the CEQA and the non-CEQA process. And I think it'd be well received if there's input where you see additional needed or other ideas. But yeah, I'll defer to others on if you have anything outside the CEQA response to that.
I have nothing further to add other than the water board at times, well, very often, we are asked to or have the responsibility of commenting on CEQA documents. I would think that the county and other agencies, whether they're responsible agencies or otherwise, have workflow processes developed internally to meet those 30-day requirements. And so hopefully Cicero Butte County does as well. We work with them on a lot of different projects. I hope that provides some comfort that those processes are likely developed internally to meet that 30-day, but certainly welcome any comment or feedback you might have as you talk to the different divisions or departments within Butte County.
Yeah, thank you. And I was just also wondering, and this was a question I had asked before, is there, in talking to my colleagues across the state who have experienced this type, I mean, this has been described by yourself as the 12th or 13th largest infrastructure project in the state. And when I talked to San Luis Obispo about Los Osos and the supervisors there, they were really surprised that the county wasn't involved as part of the committee that the water board set up. And I'm just wondering why the county isn't involved in this.
Defer to the town and city for that. Just a little bit of background though, the motions or the proposals that were put forth to town council and city council were that one, they identify essentially a subcommittee to explore this project. In both cases, the councils voted to do that and appointed the mayors and vice mayors as members of those committees. So that was done in public process, but I'll defer to the town or the city if they have anything specific they want to add with regard to the county's participation.
This is Kevin Phillips, town manager. Yeah, we'll definitely involve the county in this process throughout. Whenever it's in their jurisdiction, they will definitely have input. Just a little point of clarification, and maybe Deborah, you can ask this to the county of San Luis. I believe Los Osos is an unincorporated part of the county, so I do believe they did have quite a bit of jurisdiction over that site. But being that this project is starting in the incorporated town of Paradise and finishing in the incorporated city of Chico, I think there's a little more involvement on those two jurisdictions.
Yeah, I did talk to them about it. And when I explained that there was 18.5 miles of pipeline, they said, well, that's obviously an integral part, and the 2 pump stations. So it just seems like we would all be working together on this, because it seems like we need to all be on the same page, and it would be easier, it would seem, if we were involved. So that's why I continue to ask our staff, are you prepared for this? Are you ready to do everything that is necessary as, I can't remember the term, Steve Lucas might be able to help me out. It's not responsible agency, but what's the other term for the EIR? Participating agency, or
There's a trustee agency. Would they have public trust interest in this?
yeah, it was a different term, but anyway, I'm just trying to do my due diligence and understand what the role of the county is in this process.
We'll make sure that the county is absolutely involved in every step that they have jurisdiction over.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lucero. Any other questions regarding the EIR update? I'm hopeful that the committee members might have time in their schedules to attend one of the scoping meetings, either on the 13th or the 25th. Good opportunity to understand some of the public concerns that might be raised during that meeting. All right, hearing nothing, we'll move on to the cooperative funding agreement scope of work update. Mr. Gustafson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Snyder. Just kind of a quick update from us. Brendan Ottoboni, my colleague on the engineering side of Public Works, has been working pretty hard on the cooperative funding agreement, the CFA as we call it. We've received comments on the agreement on the wording portion from both legal departments. Comments were benign and within reason. Currently, we're working on finalizing negotiations with our consulting engineering firm, Carrillo Engineering, on the scope and costs. And we hope to have that wrapped up rather quickly. Once that's completed, we'll circulate it internally for signatures and issue a notice to proceed. So we're moving along pretty quickly and hope to have that done here shortly. Our main goal is really to make sure our timeline doesn't impact the overall timeline of the EIR. So I know Brendan is working hard to get that done, and we should see it completed here shortly.
Thanks for the update. Any questions by committee members?
None here.
I'm
Well,
here.
thanks. All right. Thank you, Mr. Gustafson. We can move on now. John, if you are ready for sort of the heart of today's meeting, principles of agreement, working session with the committee members.
Sure thing. Thank you for the chance to participate on this process. I said at a previous meeting, I had a chance to also participate in a 8-person committee that was 2 Sacramento County Board of Supervisor members, 2 Yolo County, 2 City of Sacramento City Council members, 2 City of West Sacramento Council members. So a lot of what I'll be sharing with you came out of that experience. It was about a year of working on another regional picture that culminated in the City of West Sacramento joining a regional system in Sacramento. So I'll be calling on that experience, but please take everything I say as suggestions and completely open to the committee to change or alter whatever I put out there. But for the sake of giving something to shoot at, I'm going to go ahead and do that. Let me start sharing my screen. Okay. And that should be items to cover. Okay, this is actually a copy from a PowerPoint slide that we've shared a few times. And it gives a little overview of these principles of agreement. And the basic concept here is that a committee like this develops overall general approaches to the various items that need to be addressed ultimately in a contract, in an agreement, which is called an intermunicipal agreement. And so we call those principles of agreement. And so far we've identified 11 areas that those principles would be developed by you 4 committee members. There may be more I don't think we'll have less, but I wouldn't doubt that we might end up with a few more. But we started with these 11. The first 8 here on this list come directly from the City of Chico's municipal code. And let me just scroll up here and let me zoom out just a touch so you can see the whole thing. So code section 15.40.285, we're very fortunate in that the city has developed this code section about regulation of waste received from other jurisdictions, and specifically around wastewater. So for these principles agreement, we have taken the 8 items that are shown in that code and put them in the principles as the first 8 items, just in that order. And then we've identified for so far 3 additional items that aren't mentioned there, but will need to be resolved. So now, and everything you're seeing on screen here is in the draft principles of agreement document. That's the other thought we have here in this process, is that as we work through these different items, capture comments, capture draft suggested language, it's all going to land here in this document, which then the committee will have, others will see, and each meeting we will conclude saving a version of this at the end of the meeting. That'll go back out to the committee members. And then when we resume again at the next meeting, we'll start in on a new version, picking up where this left off. So we'll have a nice record month by month of the evolution of these principles. The general thought or concept here is that we'll have discussions during this meeting. There could be some simple items, which I'll get to in a minute, that the 4 committee members may say, yeah, that's a simple sentence and that sentence looks good. All 4 agree, and we consider that one done for now. There'll be reviews later. Other times you may look at it and say, you know what, I need to talk to my staff on that one. I need to have some input or consideration, maybe talk to other council members. So fine, we'll just make a note that we'll table that one until the next meeting. There are also items here where you may decide, I need some things analyzed. The work that's being done by the City of Chico, by their engineer Carollo, is going to develop some engineering analysis, some financial numbers. That's going to come to the committee as information. And that will be critical, as you'll see in a few minutes, to a couple of these principles. So as we go along, if there's things that the committee members look at and think, I'd like to see a comparison here of these 2 things, or maybe there's a cost item or something like that, then certainly we'll take that and we can go away as support to you and then bring back analyses for you. So that's kind of just a general thought of how this will progress. So I'm going to actually scroll back up to the top of this document. Excuse me. So there's some introductory language here. Let me zoom in a little bit. I know sometimes people are on laptops and it can be hard to see. And if anybody can't read it, I can zoom in even more. There's just introductory language that has been talked about many times, but if others are looking at this, we thought they should have some of that. There's a reference to the municipal code, and as I just showed you, that's quoted down below in case anyone ever wants to refer to the exact language. And then we get to the principles of agreement themselves. And as I mentioned, 11 subject areas. We've used some blue font here. I'll get back to that yellow in a second, but we've used some blue font on those first 8 items. to just help reference them to that City of Chico code. And then the remaining 3 are in black. So that's some of the organization and coloring here. Now, some of these items we believe are pretty straightforward to take on and agree to. And so I've taken liberty to highlight 4 of them. And in a minute, we'll come back to those. What I want to do is, I think I'll just step through the 11 very briefly and give you a general sense of what this looks like. First one is around a sewer use ordinance, and the towns will need to adopt a sewer use ordinance that parallels the cities. The principles of agreement, POA, could contain a commitment from the town, for example, to have that completed by a certain point in time. That one seems pretty straightforward. User inventory, the town will need to submit an annual inventory of the entities discharging into the sewer system. So that basic inventory of who's connected, I would imagine the town's going to have that for sure as they run their system. So providing that list of who's discharging should be, again, quite straightforward. Third one is pre-treatment. So in the wastewater world, there is a need to monitor the industries and commercial operations as they discharge to the sewer system to make sure we know if they have any special things that they're discharging to the system and things that maybe would cause problems down at the treatment plant. So the EPA a long time ago created pre-treatment program requirements, and the city has one where they have requirements of all those industries and commercial establishments. That the code requires that the town make the commitment that its discharges will meet the city's requirements. Because in this case, the city's requirements are meant to protect the treatment plant and its ability to function. So the logic would be the town discharges would also do that. Now, there are some specifics there I have in this second sub-bullet. You've got to determine in this situation who does what. And this is going to come up a number of times in these principles, is there are different activities that need to happen. And some of those activities will very logically fall to the city of Chico, some very logically to the town of Paradise, and some could go either way. So we'll have some discussions along the way about some of those and arrive at some recommendation of who would handle those different things. So here, in terms of pre-treatment, this would be who would implement the various activities. Pre-treatment activities sometimes involve inspections, certain sampling, things like that. So at the right time, we'll look at that in more detail and come up with, or the committee will come up with a recommendation. Fourth item coming out of that pre-treatment work is data and information. This requires the town to provide the city with all that information it obtains related to the pre-treatment. Again, seems pretty straightforward. I colored that one in yellow. Fifth are wastewater limits. This has to do with the volume and the quality of the water that Paradise would discharge to the water pollution control plant. And this starts to get into more specific, more details. How much volume? Is there dry weather versus wet weather considerations? What about the quality of that water? So that one starts to get more complex. And it'll likely need to be addressed by, that should say, the city's CFA efforts that Eric touched on just a minute ago, that they're working with Corolla on. And we likely on number 5 here would have to wait till the Corolla work is in, although we could have some preliminary discussions. Number 6 is monitoring. You've established these limits of, say, quantity and quality. Well, then you got to measure it. Is it meeting those? So that needs to then be addressed. How is that going to be monitored? And again, who would do it? 7th is access to facilities. This just says that the city needs to be granted access to the town's wastewater facilities. In this case, it would be local pump stations and the sewer lines. So the code requires that the city be granted access. I thought that that seemed like it could be a very straightforward one. And the final one that's in the code is remedies for breach of agreement. Like all agreements, this intermunicipal agreement would need to address how the parties would handle breach. That's just, I would say that's standard contractual kind of language. I would imagine we're going to need input from the town and city attorneys in order to get the right language there. And actually, let me pause for a second and just on a side note, because this has raised the town and city attorney question. We've had some discussion amongst ourselves at staff level. When should we get the town and city attorneys engaged here? And we've agreed that we need to get engaged with them sooner rather than later. While their heavy lifting will come at the end here, when these principles of agreement would go to them and they would turn all these principles into actual formal language, that's going to be a big part of their work. We realized that we should consult with them along the way. Certainly, we want them to know what's going on here. What's the process? Do they have any concerns? Perhaps as we draft some of these principles, the town or city council members would want to run those by their attorneys, just to make sure we're not putting some words in that would be problematic for them. You just never know. So just so everyone knows, the attorneys will be brought into the picture here soon. Back to the list then. These are the ones that aren't in the code. Connection fees. So in the wastewater industry, when a new discharge comes to connect to a system, they usually have to pay 2 different fees. One is a connection fee. That's the initial one-time cost, and it's meant to cover a contribution towards paying for the constructed facilities of the treatment, in this case, the treatment plant, that are already there and available for treating the wastewater. The second thing then you pay is a monthly user fee from then on, and I'm sure we're all familiar with that in our bills that we get from all our different kinds of municipal services. So this one is around the connection fees and the fee that the town would pay as it connects initially to the system. That is certainly going to be analyzed by Corolla in the work they're going to do for the city. As I understand, Corolla will be looking at the amount of flows we've estimated and the strength of that wastewater. They'll look at the treatment plant, the CEQA plant, and then do an assessment of what impact that would have on the plant. Now there's a few components. There's some sub-bullets here. There'd be this initial connection. And at that point in time, there is a smaller number of people discharging. And then from that point on, as more people come into that core sewer service area of Paradise, they'll need to connect. They'll connect to the Paradise system, and their wastewater will go on down to the CEQA plant. So those are what we'd call ongoing connection fees. So that will have to also be looked at. And for example, the city of CEQA has a connection fee schedule for its people that connect. One thing to point out here on this connection fee and the monthly fee is that many times when we connect to our own local system, we're paying one connection fee or one user fee for both the pipes and the pump stations, if there are any, on the way to the plant and the plant itself. The cost to build the pipes and pumps, the cost to build the plant, cost to operate and maintain those pipes, operate and maintain that plant. That's usually just one number, because normally your pipes and your treatment plant are all owned by the same people. City of CEQA citizens, it's all owned by the city of CEQA. This is unusual in that Paradise will be strictly or only connecting to CEQA's treatment plant, not to the CEQA collection system. The pipe and the pump stations, the stuff that is required to get the flow to the CEQA plant will be built by Paradise. So all that is to say that the connection fee and the monthly fee that Paradise would pay is strictly associated with the treatment plant. And the fees I believe that CEQA has for the rest of their citizens, I believe right now, although are total fees. So we'll have to work with CEQA to understand and to get a treatment only fee worked out there. And the third sub-bullet here is there are some details to work out when you have a regional situation like this. How are the fees collected and paid? There's different ways that can happen. Number 10 is the monthly user fee. I've already been alluding to that. But similar, this is a treatment only monthly fee. So how much should be charged to the town? And again, how should they be collected and paid? And finally, an item around the O&M of operation and maintenance of facilities. The town's going to construct what we call the export pipeline. Well, the town's going to construct its collection system within the town, within the sewer service area. That collection system is wholly going to be operated and maintained by the town. Then there's this export pipeline down to the treatment plant and a connection point down at the plant. So that export line and connection will be built by the town of Paradise. It could very well be that the town of Paradise then operates and maintains that pipeline. That could be very simple. But it isn't unusual for, in this situation, for some pieces of a system like this to actually be worked out for someone else. For example, where the Paradise pipeline ends at the CEQA plant, we are planning on a termination structure there that would probably have a flow meter in it, a sampler to sample the Paradise flow and measure its flow. Now that could also be done up in the town of Paradise, but if it's located at the plant, then it could be that the committee decides after discussing it to have the CEQA people do that and then be paid for the cost of doing that. So there are some trade-offs that starts to get, you can sense there into some detail, but it's important detail, and eventually it does need to be worked out. So those are the 11 categories we have so far. I'm going to pause there and see if there are any questions about any of that discussion.
I don't.
No questions here.
Okay. And
I'm good here.
Okay.
John, we have a question from Mr. Lucas.
Yeah, I saw. Is that in the chat?
No, I just raised my hand.
Oh,
Is that okay?
yep, certainly.
Just a quick question, and I don't know if this is the appropriate place in these documents, but will Paradise retain the right to the treatment, the treated water post-treatment? Or once it enters the treatment plant, does the city then own that water for purposes of reuse?
That is a fantastic question. I know people always say that when someone asks a question, that's a fantastic one, but it really is. It's a question that's been argued and really across the state. Who owns wastewater? It used to be you couldn't get rid of it fast enough. You know, you discharge it, gone. But there has been more focus on that. I'm going to need to get back to you on that because I've seen lately several different ways it's played out. So I think that actually, I'm going to add, I think that's a fantastic because previously there was the rule of thumb was that it was abandoned, that once you basically left your home, you abandon it to the treatment plant owner. But as I mentioned, that has gotten more complex. There's been some, I think, some legal stuff that's played out. So we will get more information on that.
Thank you, sir.
Great.
Ms. Lucero?
Thanks for that question, Steve. I had that same question. Also, I was wondering, and I know you went over this, but I wasn't sure exactly what you said. Who owns like the pump stations and the pipeline? Is that all still to be worked out? Or is that something that is going to be set now and then you put this into the document? I'm just not sure how it all works.
Typically in this situation, where in this case, the town of Paradise is building a facility, so including that export pipeline all the way to the plant, pump station, etc. Then, and that entity, the town, is paying for it, then they would own it. There have been certain situations, and this happens, of course, with developers. They'll build something and then they including sewers, and then they turn them over to the city. That's part of the conditions for their development. So that isn't the case here, but it's not inconceivable there could be some discussion about the ownership. But at least when I look at this, oh, the other thing is that, I'm sorry, that Paradise is the only one using the pipeline all the way to the CEQA plant. It's only the town of Paradise using it. So that would again reinforce the likelihood that the town of Paradise would just own it. Yeah.
As a follow-up to that, if say, the town says, okay, CEQA says, okay, I would like to utilize portions of this or lateral off that second pump station, for development. In that case, does that trigger a whole nother EIR and a whole nother study at that point?
And I don't know if anyone from the town or city would like to speak to that.
John, I'll go ahead and speak to
Okay.
that. This is Mark Maddox, Public Works Director for the Town of Paradise. And I think that's also a great question and something we want to be very clear on, that the proposed project we're discussing in the environmental impact report and the cooperative funding agreement that has also been discussed on the agenda, all of this relates to our sewer service area that's currently shown on our website at paradisesewer.com. And yes, any future consideration of any sort of modification to the sewer service area or addition to the sewer service area would require its own complete environmental review. And there is no other plans at this time for any sort of expansion like that. But again, if that did come forward and it would necessitate its own separate environmental review. I just really want to be clear that we are solely focused on the sewer service area within the town of Paradise without any development between the two communities. Certainly no collection of wastewater as it would result of a potential project if it did move forward, in fact, between the two communities under this EIR and this project. So to answer your question, yes, it would require its own separate review at a future date if that did come to fruition.
And that would be true also even under the design build process. If for instance, you wanted to change during the design build, would that be allowed?
Well, I'll go ahead and answer this question as well. And what you're referring to is a proposed legislation introduced by Assemblyman Gallagher for AB 36, which could potentially add the option for design build contracting for project delivery for the Town of Paradise Sewer Project. And that legislation would have no impact on the scope of the project and what's being discussed in the EIR, including additional connections. I don't foresee that as a potential modification or having any effect, good or bad, on the environmental impact review process and timeline. There are no fast tracks or shortcuts or options that we're looking at to try and say we're doing one thing and do another, and trying to be very consistent, provide good information about what it is that we're actually talking about and being discussed compared to pending legislation that may or may not move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Well, what I would like to do, if the committee is up for it, is start working on the principles of agreement. No time like the present.
Hey, John,
Yes.
this is Clint. Before we jump into that, want to check, folks want to take a 5-minute break, or are we good? Maybe a question for the committee members. Any need for a 5-minute break or just continue?
I'm fine.
I think we're good here.
Okay. Thank
I'm
you.
still good.
All right. Okay, and so we'll just play with this a little bit because this will be the first one, but what we'll do is I'll craft in here and take down language that everyone, of course, can see on screen here of a principle that could address a given item. And then there can be discussion among the committee members, suggested changes to it, etc. And then when that's finished, we could come to a general conclusion about which I'll then indicate is the status. Is it agreed? And I should say, anytime you arrive at an agreement, that's still draft. So it really just means that you don't see, as of today's meeting, need to talk about that item anymore. You could come back in a couple meetings from now and say, you know, I need to talk a little bit more about item 1. I actually have identified a concern. That's totally fine. But it's a way, you know, it's a way here of working our way through these. And as I mentioned earlier, on any of these, you could also say, let's stop there. I need to talk more between now and next meeting, and we'll table it for more discussion. Okay. So this first one has to do with adopting a sewer use ordinance that parallels the city's ordinance. So, for example, this could simply say that the town of Paradise will adopt sewer use ordinance that parallels the city of Chico's sewer use ordinance. Then what comes to my mind there is, well, by when? By tomorrow? By 20 years from now? No, this sounds like it needs some time frame. Well, for certain, that has to be in place before anybody discharges to the system. So it could say this sewer use ordinance will be in place prior to any initial discharge of Paradise wastewater to the Chico WPCP. So I put that there for the committee to consider. Do you feel this is way off, or yeah, any suggested changes of any sort?
I'd like the documents.
John, this is Jody Jones.
Yes.
Language seems very reasonable to me, but I've never read the city of Chico sewer use ordinance. I don't know if there's anything in there that Paradise would say, oh, I don't know about that. So Steve and I would both like to see a copy of that ordinance.
That's excellent.
Yeah, and John, this is Andrew Coolidge, City of Chico. I'd like to make sure our staff's comfortable with that, or, you know, if it needs to happen a little prior to that process, that we,
Yep.
you know, have city staff weigh in on that.
Good point. Good, good, good. That's a perfect example. So this one, of course, we're going to table. We won't decide anything today. We'll get the use ordinance for people to look at. And there can be discussion. Yeah, this is perfect. Good. Any other thoughts or comments on that item?
Not here.
Okay.
I'm just wondering if, John, before you move on, this is Clint Snyder, AEO with Central Valley Water Board. If we're saying use ordinance will be in place, I'm just wondering if everyone has an understanding of what in place means, just given the timing of things, and you know, is it worth a little bit more specificity there to describe what in place means. You know, are the committee members really looking for council adoption of that ordinance, you know, concurrently? What really is the expectation there? Maybe everyone is familiar with that, but in the spirit of transparency and recognizing we have you know, members of the public and that participating in the YouTube feed, might be worth including a little bit more there.
That's a great example. I think that is exactly what we should put in, is if we have terms that sound just a bit nebulous in place, then that's a flag to me. Yeah, anything nebulous like that, let's strive to get something a little more specific.
Well, I think too, in particular, those pieces that would require additional vetting through public process. So, for instance, if the city or the town was to take a draft ordinance to council for consideration, that would give the public an opportunity yet again to, you know, opine or provide comment on that draft ordinance prior to consideration. So that might provide the public some comfort knowing that, you know, there are additional steps involved in that particular process.
This is Jody Jones. That ordinance would have to come before the council twice for a first and second reading. And then there's generally a waiting period before it takes effect. So all of that needs to be thought about when we decide what the deadline here is going to be.
Good point. We need to work backwards and make sure we allow plenty of time for that process. Yep.
John, to your point, when would you like to see? I mean, you know, obviously moving along here, but you know, we don't need to rush any particular point of this process. But is that something you'd rather see sooner than later, or what's your thoughts?
I'm sorry. See
that ordinance adopted sooner in the process or later in the process?
Generally, well, I don't know. What I was going to say, I always like to see things done sooner rather than later, because there's always going to be stickier things that will take our time up later. But that being said, I'd have to think a little bit about that, because there are sometimes when you need certain things to advance a little further. Could be something with the design or something that you need more specific information. I'll have to think about that.
Okay. I mean, just when it comes back, if maybe we can have some recommendations, if we can bounce that off of, you know, both of our city staffs and see if we, you know, what their thoughts are as well, just move to when to move forward with it.
Okay. That's very good stuff. Good. Yeah. Okay. How are we doing on time? Good. Moving to the second item, user inventory. Oh, and let me just, I'll restate it. Just, we're going to review all of whatever's captured here with the attorneys when we meet with them. So I always want to kind of make sure that's clear. This one, again, seems relatively straightforward. Town of Paradise will submit an annual inventory of entities discharging into its sewer system. You know, would there be a date stated that comes to mind? Oh, if you're going to submit something once a year, well, when? Each
Is
year?
this in arrears or looking at the future?
This, I'm pretty sure, is those people currently discharging. So for example, let's say the report is issued on December 1st of each year. So as of November 30th or whatever, the town will have a record at that moment in time of who's discharging into the town system, because you're going to be billing people.
So it's a point in time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I guess, John,
go ahead, Clint.
Go ahead, Mayor.
I would just say if that can coincide with, you know, or at least we can ask city staff if maybe it can coincide with, you know, whatever reporting we need to do. That might be helpful if the two cities were just correlated with their annual reports in that way.
Yeah, that would be my comment, was to ask Mr. Gustafson or Mr. Orm if they have reporting deadlines that they need to meet, and then to make sure that this reporting deadline is maybe a month or two or whatever before that, so they have time to get their things in order for their reporting that's necessary.
Yeah, perfect.
And I guess just in the spirit of maybe furthering the conversation or making sure that we're looking at this from all angles. The situation with the town of Paradise is a little bit unique in that it's currently under reconstruction. Would, just in my experience with wastewater treatment plants, it seems to me anyway that it would be advantageous to the city of Chico, not just to know which residences or industries are currently discharging to the collection system at a particular point in time, but also potentially, you know, plans that are under review at the town of Paradise, and that would get at maybe a little bit more of a confident projection as to what additional flows the city might be or might anticipate occurring over the next, say, 6 months or over a year.
I think that's
I don't want to speak on behalf of Chico, but
no, it makes sense, and appreciate that.
Clint, from the town's perspective, that's data and information we have readily available, and we could track that as it relates to the sewer service area and provide with our, you know, known connections and ones that may occur over the next 12-month period. So that shouldn't be too difficult for us to provide.
And this is Eric with the city of Chico. Yeah, we would absolutely want that and want to see what's on the horizon, and especially you know, once any sort of development application is received by the town of Paradise, we'd want to know.
So if I may, Mr. Gustafson, do you think that should be a monthly update or, you know, a couple of times a year, or what would you feel most comfortable with there?
Yeah, at a minimum quarterly, I think, just so at least we know what's on the horizon and can do our capacity projections appropriately. But, you know, we have great open lines of communication with the town of Paradise. So I don't foresee it being a problem, but we would want to, you know, include at least a minimum threshold on this item, and, you know, quarterly report or something along those lines, I think would suffice.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
and I guess another question for Mr. Maddox and Mr. Gustafson, trying to get at this, maybe another term that is a little bit ambiguous. When we say annual inventory of entities, are we really thinking of some sort of a classification, you know, a subclass or what have you of, say, commercial dischargers, and then maybe a separate for residential, recognizing the types of the character of the waste can be different. I don't know, just again, in the spirit of transparency for the public and consideration.
Clint, that sounds reasonable to me. I think we could model something that would match potential rate schedule that would definitely distinguish between the types of uses, and quarterly would work for us as well.
I agree. From City Chico, I mean, we want to delineate between, residential users versus commercial users, and determine if they're, going to be a significant industrial user, and so on and so forth. So it's all reasonable and information that we would want to gather proactively.
So not to split hairs, but so what we'll have with a quarterly is we'll basically have a moving 12-month window of estimate. This future estimate will be always looking 12 months out. So each quarter. Okay. So this is no longer, so if it's submitted quarterly, yeah, we still need to talk about, not sure if it makes sense. If there's anything, I don't know if both entities, well, I mean, we could just use calendar quarters. Unless there was some reason otherwise.
John, in your experience, when we talk about putting together these principles of agreement and user inventory being one of those principles, does the language that you have penciled out here is it generally reflective of what would be codified in the principles of agreement and forwarded to the attorneys to work with? Or yes, would you be looking for additional detail?
No, I mean, at least when I've done this before, the ultimate words that we capture here are exactly what's handed to the attorneys.
Okay. Yeah. So the draft language you have here could be, should the committee members, okay this, give it their blessing, that could be enough information to sort of check the box for number 2, user inventory.
Right. Okay. And what we'll do with the attorneys, one reason to engage with them early is we'll show them these as the committee comes to its general agreement on them. We'll have the attorneys look at it and they may come back and say, yeah, it's my experience. They'll look at some of them and say, yep. Then they'll look at another one and say, well, hold it. I need to know how often, or I need to know this. And then we can come back to the committee and with that feedback and add a little bit more. And I should say, it's up to the committee to decide how to handle these principles. What happened in my other effort was we went back and forth. The committee said, yep, that looks good. Along the way, they reviewed it with their councils and boards. So people had their updates from their committee members. But then when the committee was done and the attorneys had that quality control check on it to make sure, then in this case, each of the councils would look at those principles and adopt or potentially request changes. Hopefully along the way, if they had concerns, that's being fed back to the committee, and we don't have very much of that, but I would imagine both councils are going to want the chance to do that. Then it's turned over to the attorneys. They jointly work on it, city and town attorneys. They would come up with something they believe, but then that's the actual agreement. That's the legally binding document that again goes back to the 2 councils. And that's the document that's binding. Okay, yeah, I just wanted to provide a little bit kind of a look ahead. Okay. All right. Pre-treatment, as I mentioned, is a little more involved. But let's go to number 4. Pre-treatment data access. And the code simply says city has to be provided with all information that the town obtains related to those pre-treatment activities, that gathering of data from the commercial or industrial users. Now that feels like it needs a statement of how often.
Well, I think it needs more than that. And this is kind of in the same bucket as the first one. I don't know what pre-treatment activities are. I'd like a lot more information about what it is the town actually has to do.
I'm guessing the city of Chico, well, I know you have your own pre-treatment program.
Correct.
So, and I'm sure that's a public document. So at a minimum, we could circulate that as an example.
Yeah, so we have a pretty substantial pre-treatment program that's listed on our website. There's a survey involved to determine, what type of industrial user an applicant might be, and that lists a lot of the requirements. So there's several different levels of industrial users in their categories, depending on the quantity and the the materials are what they intend to discharge into the system. So it's a pretty robust pre-treatment program, and all of those documents and the application process, the surveys, the requirements are all listed on our website, and they're pretty robust. So they should be easily accessible. That we could provide that information here pretty quickly.
I'll also mention, Vice Mayor Jones, that the water boards have a role in auditing pre-treatment programs, and at times US EPA will audit pre-treatment programs. It's a very rigorous audit, would more than likely include both the town of Paradise and the city of Chico, depending on how these agreements are formed in the future. All of that information, is included online as it relates to the facility. There can be notices of violations and penalties issued in some cases for failure to comply with the pre-treatment requirements, and the city itself can issue penalties, dischargers for not complying with the city's requirements. In most cases, we're not talking about residences. You're not talking about restaurants necessarily. Really, what you're trying to get at are those high strength users, commercial users, for the most part. Really getting at, as Mr. Gustafson said, the flow and the character strength of the wastes that are being discharged to prevent an upset at the wastewater treatment plant in the city of Chico.
And to be clear, Clinton, let me make sure I understand. I may have misstated something and caused some confusion. So the city of Chico has a pre-treatment program to protect its treatment plant, if you will. And so the town of Paradise, its commercial and industrial users will also have to meet the city of Chico's pre-treatment program.
Right.
In order to protect Chico's treatment plant. I may have misstated something. The town is not developing its own pre-treatment program.
Correct.
It is making sure that its commercial and industrial users meet the city's requirements. Now, how does the town do that? So Eric, and I know this is getting more at item 3, but that's okay. This is good background. So Eric, maybe you could explain a little bit, what activities does the city take with their commercial and industrial users, kind of week to week, month to month, year to year? What does that look like? Because I think that might be some of the activities the town would have to do.
Yeah, so we employ 2 industrial waste inspectors that will kind of profile and inspect the industrial users within our connections, and depending on the character of their discharge and the quantity of their discharge, the frequency can vary. But we survey them once a year. There's some standards that are put in depending on what they're discharging and their pre-treatment process, and some of those inspections are accelerated. We do also, of course, a little bit different, but as Mr. Snyder mentioned, we monitor the restaurant and food service industry too, and put some fats, oil, and greases reduction measures in place for those folks as well. But the industrial users are monitored pretty heavily because they could really wreak havoc on a wastewater treatment plant system depending on what they're discharging. So it's a process. They're regulated and categorized per again the quantity and kind of the load of or the character, if you will, of what they plan to discharge, and we regulate them accordingly according to our pre-treatment program.
So then it seems to me that these number 3 and 4 should specify what activities the town would need to do in order to meet the city's pre-treatment program. These 2 people that you hire that go out and inspect, are they going to inspect our people too, or do we have to have our own?
Exactly.
This is very, very general and doesn't really tell me what the town of Paradise's commitment is.
Right. So here, to your point, Vice Mayor Jones, it's actually in item 3 here. We need to determine, and you said it perfectly, in this situation, there's 2 basic choices. One would be that the town hires its own people to do those inspections and then provides all that information to the city, or the town, in a sense, contracts with the city, and those 2 people come up, or whatever it is, and do those activities. So,
and number 4 really depends on how you do that in number 3.
Yeah, so maybe we don't advance number 4 much more today. But I'm really glad we're having this discussion, because it's exactly what we will have to bottom out. But I'm going to capture in a comment here just that fact that 2 general options. Town hires its own pre-treatment staff, contracts with city for that service. Okay. And as we look at other things, O&M of pipelines, things like that, those same kind of discussions can happen, because it kind of has to do with that economy of scale. It may, for the town to take on certain things, it just might be much more cost effective. And if it met the city's needs and goals also, maybe there is a way to consider some of that. Okay, so yes, we'll leave that for now, and we will get committee members a copy of the City of Chico's pretreatment program. So as Eric said, it's online, but we'll also go ahead and get specific PDFs of it and just get that to all 4 committee members, just so you all have the same thing in your hands. Anything more for today on that one? Okay, how are we doing on time? Okay. I think this is the last of the low-hanging fruit, so we may finish a little early. Famous last words. Access to facilities. The city will need to be granted access to the town's wastewater facilities, including those within the town's boundaries. So the facilities currently planned for the town, just to kind of recap for people, there'll be buried sewers in the streets in the sewer service area. There will be small pump stations at different places within the town along those sewers. There'll be the long export pipeline down from the ridge. There is a transition structure as we come off the ridge and down and become flatter. There'll be a transition structure that we need for hydraulic reasons from the engineering side. But it's a buried, basically a large manhole kind of thing buried. Then pipeline continues on all the way to the plant. And as I mentioned earlier, what's pictured at the plant is another buried large manhole, but it would have a flow meter in it and a sampler. So those are the facilities we're talking about here that the city would need to be granted access to. Any other clarifying language?
One I'm thinking about is, should the city wish to access any of the town's wastewater facilities, particularly given, things like traffic constraints, traffic controls in some instances, would there be a need? Would notification to the town be warranted prior to that access? Any of those types of considerations meaningful to the town or city?
I think it makes sense to have something along those lines, but I'd defer to staff.
Yep. Eric, you got that?
Yeah, I got that. Yeah, it's not a problem. I think that could be added in and worked out pretty easily as far as notification and yeah, whatever timing or minimum requirement is worded in here, I think we could accommodate that quite easily. Seems reasonable.
Yeah, I threw in the word safe because what it triggered for me, Clint, which is a really good one, your example is a good one, safe access. So certainly we'd want to make sure we don't have like very high electrical, big electrical stuff where you really have to be very, very safe. But still, we do have electrical equipment here and things like that, and traffic issues in certain locations. We'd want to have the safe access a lot arranged. Yeah, that's good.
I think it just speaks a little bit to, the spirit of coordination and cooperation in this, the inspections of these facilities or maintenance of these facilities. And I think that's, that would be the intent of the town and city. Again, my bringing it up is just more, the spirit of starting that conversation and getting people to think about other things that might be considered here. Ultimately, it's the committee's decision as to, what they want to include or not include.
And I think not only notification too, but we would want to, any sort of inspection scenario, not only notify Town of Paradise, but also seek collaboration for some of those items too, such as traffic control and things like that, we wouldn't want to have to dispatch, additional public works resources when doing some sewer inspections. So that added to this agreement, I think would help out quite a bit. Great points.
This isn't. Anyway, that's not great English, but something about, looking for ways to jointly conduct inspections is what, That, yeah. It could be, I could see a number of ways. That might actually end up being a kind of a statement in the agreement, just a general statement that the town and the city will look for ways to jointly collaborate to, minimize staff impacts and. Okay.
Mark or Kevin, do you have anything you'd like to add to that? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I'm sure the attorneys will add in hold harmless and all the insurance requirements, but we'll let them do that when they get a hold of it.
Yeah, nothing to add on my end.
All right.
Okay. Those were the 4 that I had flagged as being a bit simpler. We're coming up on 3:40. I guess it's at the committee's pleasure here as to whether you want to for us to take a look at another one of these items, or do we call it good for today?
From our side, I think we're good. One thing just from our committee members is if we can get this emailed out and then they can digest kind of the next topics moving forward, and then we'll if you want to cover some topics maybe like you did today where you highlight them, if you get that out early on, so then they can start brainstorming and maybe asking staff questions early on so that we get the information to them so they feel like they can add value.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about some mechanics here, Clint and committee. The idea I had, I mentioned at the start here, is that as we conclude here today, I will save this and it will be version 1 and it's got today's date in it. And then it would go out, and that's kind of memorialized. As of this date, this is what was written. Between now and the next meeting, then any of the entities can look at this, put it in revisions mode if they want, or just PDF and mark it, whatever to bring back. But then at the next meeting, we would pick up exactly where it is here, work it in the next meeting like we were doing, and again, memorialize it at the end of the meeting, because I want to make sure the committee owns this document, that it's not evolving elsewhere. So I need to work out a little bit of the mechanics of doing that with you, Clint.
Sure.
But that was my first thought, to kind of keep a trail of versions, and also to keep any changes focused here in this public forum.
Yeah, and I think the committee members can not only look at the language that was kind of roughed in today for those 4 items, but also be considering the other items that we haven't addressed today, and that would be a good opportunity, should they wish to meet with their staff, to start talking about some of these other topics that will come up in future meetings.
And I had identified, I had gone through here and identified 3 groups of these 11 items. First 4 we did today. The second group were a little more involved, but still didn't require Carollo's work from the city. And then the last group required Carollo's work, so it's tied to the timing of that. So if it's all right, I'll let you continue, Clint. But what I'd like to do, I'm going to use a different color. I'm going to highlight those next items that we would take on next time. I want to get that in here. I don't want to send out a separate thing later, because then I've created a different version. It'll only take me a minute.
Sure.
And this will simply have in a different color those other items for next time.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Does that work for the committee?
Yeah, it sounds good.
Okay.
Fine.
Maybe John. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
It's fine.
Okay, thank you. Well, maybe John, while you're doing that, we'll move to the public forum and then the closing committee remarks. And then if you don't mind, just raise your hand when
no, but I think
those things done, and we'll circle back to you.
Oh,
I know John has to leave here in about
okay.
7 or 8 minutes, so we'll try to be mindful of that also. So time for the public forum. Does any agency representative or a member of the public may address the committee on any matter, not just those that we've spoken about today, but other questions, concerns you might have about the project. If you wouldn't mind just raising your hand, should you have a question. And Ms. Lucero.
I just had a question about, say, for instance, this document that's being created. Is that going to be uploaded on the website?
I hadn't actually talked about that yet.
We haven't. I'm wondering, though, if as part of the committee's minutes, we could include this, at least the pieces that they've worked on. I'm thinking through that quickly. I think there's a way that we could probably do that as part of the package, the minutes package.
Thank you. I was just curious. I didn't see it on the website or it's part of the minutes. So I just wondered how it was going to be handled.
Yeah, I think now that we've gone through it and the committee members have had a chance to discuss it, we could just capture that as part of the minutes, at least those pieces they've discussed thus far. That might work well. And maybe just for me, Ms. Lucero, Just to capture your comments correctly in the minutes, are you speaking as a supervisor for Butte County or speaking as a concerned citizen?
Really a concerned citizen, not because I'm not officially appointed to this committee. We don't have an official role. And of course, I couldn't speak for the board because I'm only one person.
Okay, I just want to make sure I actually adequately captured your comments in the minutes. Thank you. Any other questions?
None here.
Okay, closing committee remarks, and then we'll turn back to John. We start with the city of Chico this time. Mayor?
Yeah, no, I'm glad to see we're making some progress and getting this work done. Appreciate everybody's time and all the staff members as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Reynolds?
Dittos to that. And I think it's been great working on the principles of agreement, and appreciate John walking us through and doing all that hard work. So thank you.
Mayor Crowder?
I would ditto what the mayor and vice mayor of Chico said, and want to thank everybody as well.
Vice Mayor Jones?
I think this is a good process. And John, thank you for keeping us on track because it's kind of complicated. I do think it would be much easier if we were all in the same room. And I would again ask that as soon as possible, we meet in person. Clint, even if you want to be in Sacramento, the rest of us could be in the same room.
Sure. Yeah, I'm actually in Reading at the Reading office, and it is our hope that we'll be able to meet in person during the June meeting. And so just a little short trying to find a space, but we're certainly endeavoring to do that for June.
You could do it at the Town of Paradise, or we would be happy to go to Chico as well.
I appreciate that. We'll certainly work hard to find an appropriate venue.
Also, I don't know if you saw, there was a comment in chat from Mr. Lucas.
Oh, thank you for calling that to my attention. So I guess for those on the YouTube chat, not knowing whether or not you can see this or not, it says sewer service area not along the pipe to Chico be addressed. It seems reasonable to anticipate that landowners contiguous to the town's collection system with a developed use and failing septic system would desire to connect rather than repair an existing system. This is a different scenario from new development. And you're correct, that is a different scenario, and certainly take that into account as we work our way through. Probably the EIR more so than this particular venue, but I will chat with City of Chico staff and town staff, and we'll see how best to address that question, but appreciate you posing that. John, are you ready?
Yeah, and I think I'm still screen sharing, or did it stop?
You are still screen sharing.
Okay, good. So what I did is I used green here and indicated the items that we would take on next time: pre-treatment, which we talked actually a fair amount about already, wastewater monitoring. And we may get into some of these and decide we do have to wait for the Corolla work, so that'll be fine. We'll just note that. Remedies for breach of agreement. That one might need input from the town and city attorneys. O&M of facilities, and then this new item about the ownership of the discharged wastewater. So those, we'll see how many, these are, I'd anticipated would take longer each item. So I'm not expecting we'll get through another 4 the next meeting, but certainly we should be able to get through a few of these and introduce a few others. That's it.
Perfect. And thank you, John. Really appreciate all your work today and walking the committee members through this. It's really helpful to have HDR's expertise here, particularly since you recently went through this. So thanks again. Any parting comments from town or city manager or public works directors before we adjourn?
From the town, just thank you for all your hard work, and thank you, Chico, for being so involved and putting the time and effort in to make sure this project moves forward.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, from Chico, nothing here. Thank you all. I know it's a tedious process. It's a lengthy process, but we're off to a good start. Thank you.
Nothing from my end. Good process thus far. Great discussion. Appreciate everybody's involvement.
Well, thanks everyone for being here today. Really appreciate the time that taken away from your busy schedules. And we will recap the minutes and the work that you did today. And we'll get that back out along with, we're very hopeful that we'll be meeting in person in June. We'll find an appropriate venue and certainly notice that to the committee members, staff, and public as well. So thanks again. Everybody have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Clint.
Take
Bye
care.
now.
Thank you.
I'll end the meeting. Clint?